3 years, that fig tree in the backyard has been alive for 3 years. And produced exactly nothing. Green leaves every spring. Healthy branches pushing skyward and zero fruit. You watered it on schedule. You fed it the expensive flowering fertilizer, the one with the glossy label promising accelerated production. You pruned at the right angle, at the right time. The way the gardening magazine said, you did everything correctly, and the tree just sat there. Growing leaves like that was its only purpose on Earth. The global market for plant growth regulators, flowering stimulants, fruiting promoters, hormone-based boosters runs into billions of dollars annually. Billions, and the home grower, the person with one mango tree or 3 stubborn avocado saplings in the corner of the yard, is the ideal repeat customer, because that person keeps coming back 50, 80, 120 reais every season for a bottle of synthetic hormones that mimic something the tree already manufactures on its own for free, the moment it believes its survival is at risk. That is the part they will never print on the label. The mechanism you're paying to simulate already exists inside the living wood of that tree. It has been there since the day you planted it, a biological switch, hardwired into the vascular tissue, waiting for a signal that no liquid fertilizer in any bottle can send, a signal the entire plant nutrition industry has zero financial incentive to tell you about, because the moment you understand what it is, you stop being their customer. 1 nail, ordinary galvanized steel, less than 5 reais for an entire box of them, 30 seconds of deliberate work. That is the total input cost of triggering what their most expensive flowering enhancer only pretends to deliver, and this is not some internet hack invented last Tuesday. Farmers in the Roman Empire documented this technique over 2,000 years ago. Columella, writing around 60 AD, described growers driving copper tools into the bark of stubborn fig and olive trees that refuse to produce. Japanese orchardists refined the method across centuries. Mediterranean farmers passed it, generation to generation, without ever needing a laboratory. It works, not through folklore or superstition, but through a specific, measurable vascular stress response that peer-reviewed research has since confirmed. The system you trusted was built to keep you buying. The tree was never the problem. So the tree was never broken, but somebody made a lot of money convincing you it was. Between 1950 and 1970, the agrochemical industry exploded out of post-war synthetic chemistry labs with one clear mission: turn every backyard grower into a repeat customer. Hormone sprays, flowering enhancers, 50, 80, 100, and $20 a bottle. Products designed not to solve the problem permanently, but to keep you coming back next season with the same dead branches and the same open wallet. Here is what they buried. For nearly 2,000 years, farmers across 3 continents already knew how to flip a fruit tree. From leaf production into fruit production, Roman orchardists drove copper tools into the bark of stubborn figs and olives. Japanese cultivators practiced a technique called ringaku, inflicting precise controlled wounds on trunks that refused to fruit. Chinese manuscripts from the Song dynasty documented perforating bark to rebalance a tree's energy. No spray, no subscription, no lab. The orchards themselves were the proof. Generation after generation, none of this was ever disproven. That is the part that should make you angry. Nobody published a study saying these methods failed. No extension agent stood in a field and demonstrated that a nail does not work. What happened was simpler and uglier. The economic incentive to teach a farmer a technique that costs nothing was exactly zero, so the knowledge just stopped being mentioned. It vanished from nursery pamphlets, from university curricula, from every gardening column, quietly funded by the companies selling you another bottle. Think about that for a second. You spent 3 years blaming yourself, buying new soil amendments, switching fertilizer brands, watching the leaves come back lush and green every spring while the branches stayed empty. And the entire time, the solution was a single piece of hardware store, steel, and 30 seconds of deliberate pressure. The industry did not need to lie to you directly. They just needed to make sure nobody told you the truth. They needed your frustration. They needed you to stand in the garden aisle one more time, scanning labels, trusting that the next product would finally be the one. That cycle is not gardening. It is dependency. By design, and the mechanism it exploits, the exact biological switch inside your tree that a nail activates and a bottle never will, turns out to be measurable, repeatable, and backed by peer-reviewed science, that the flowering enhancer market would prefer you never read. The tree flowers, within weeks of a single puncture wound, buds that sat dormant for 3, 4, 5 years, suddenly swell and crack open. No hormone bottle, no consultant, just a nail, and 30 seconds. That result looks like magic, until you understand the two circuits running beneath the bark. Here is the first one. The moment metal breaches living wood, cells rupture. Those ruptured cells release jasmonate, a chemical distress flare that travels upward through the vascular tissue faster. Then sap moves downward. Within 24 hours, ethylene production spikes. Not a little, a statistically significant surge documented by the American Society for Horticultural Science. Ethylene is not some exotic lab compound. It is the same gas a ripe banana releases on your kitchen counter, inside the tree. It functions as a secondary messenger, flipping vegetative shoot tips into flower buds. The conversion is not random. It is a survival protocol encoded. Over millions of years, a tree that registers structural damage interprets one thing: I might die. And an organism that believes death is near has exactly one remaining job: reproduce. Flowers become fruit. Fruit holds seed. Seed carries the genetic line forward. The nail did not trick anything. It spoke the language the tree was already listening for. Now the second circuit, running in parallel. Where the nail sits, phloem tissue compresses. Phloem is the pipeline that carries sugar from the canopy down to the roots. Partially block that pipeline, and sugars begin pooling above the obstruction. Picture a traffic jam on a highway off-ramp. Cars stack up. Sugar stacks up the same way. A Dutch university study showed that when soluble sugar concentration rises in bud tissue, it directly upregulates expression of the FT protein, the primary mobile flowering signal in temperate fruit trees. The tree reads that sugar buildup as a chemical memo: conditions are right, bloom now. Two completely independent pathways: the jasmonate stress cascade, the sugar accumulation trigger. Both converge on the same biological outcome: floral initiation in a tree that stubbornly refused to leave its vegetative phase. That convergence is not coincidence. It is redundancy engineered by natural selection, a failsafe so critical that evolution built two separate switches for the same door. This is why farmers in Japan, in China, around the Mediterranean, on opposite sides of the planet, with no shared language and no shared literature, all independently arrived at the same gesture: a blade, a nail, wedge driven into wood. They did not copy each other. They observed the same biological constant and responded to it. The mechanism was always there, consistent, repeatable. The only thing missing was the modern explanation. And the only reason that explanation stayed buried is that it cannot be sold in a bottle. But biology does not hand out blank checks. This protocol responds predictably in certain species and fails dangerously in others. And the difference between a harvest and a dead tree lives in that distinction. 2 minutes, that is the total time between a barren tree and one that flowers the following season. Not 2 months of foliar spraying, not 2 years of adjusting soil pH. 2 minutes with a single nail, and the tree's own hormonal cascade does every bit of remaining work without another touch. Here is what that looks like from the tree's perspective. Late winter, the sap is still slow, pooled low in the roots, waiting for the signal to rise. The buds sit locked in dormancy, the same dormancy they have sat in for 3, 4, 5 fruitless years, while the canopy kept throwing out leaves like an engine burning fuel with no destination. Then a narrow steel point enters the trunk, 60 to 80 millimeters of clean, bright, galvanized construction nail, sterilized with isopropyl alcohol and air-dried for 2 minutes before it ever touches bark. 1 puncture, the vascular cambium registers damage, and in that instant, the hormonal balance shifts from growth toward reproduction. Because the organism now believes its timeline has shortened. You did not add anything. You did not feed it. You did not buy a single product. You removed the tree's sense of safety, and its own biology wrote the rest of the prescription. The timing is non-negotiable: 2 to 4 weeks before the normal budding window. 4 temperate stone fruits in southern and southeastern Brazil. That means July into August for apples and plums in cooler northern climates, late February through early March. The University of California Cooperative Extension identifies this Pre-bud swell period as the moment of peak hormonal sensitivity in deciduous species. Miss that window by a month and the signal arrives after the hormonal decision has already been made. The nail becomes just a wound, but hit that window and the tree converts the injury into ethylene, redistributes auxin away from vegetative terminals and channels stored carbohydrates toward flower bud. Differentiation: 78% of temperate species tested in peer-reviewed trials showed statistically significant flowering response. No bottle of synthetic cytokinin on any shelf has ever matched that number at that price. Point: the catch most people miss is not the nail, it is reading the tree first. A healthy, vigorous specimen that refuses to flower is a candidate. A stressed, transplanted, or nutrient-starved tree is not. The difference between a harvest and a dead tree lives in that distinction. You are not an applicator. You are a diagnostician. You observe whether growth is excessively vegetative, confirm reproductive maturity has been reached, and verify the organism is strong enough to interpret a wound as a signal rather than a death sentence. 30 seconds of sterilization, a 2-minute intervention time to the week. Then you step back, and the system that was always built into the wood finally gets permission to do what decades of industrial inputs never triggered: less action, more fruit. It was just never asked the right question at the right moment. And that question has a follow-up, because the way you deliver that single puncture determines whether the wound heals clean or becomes an open door for every pathogen in the orchard. Picture the next supply chain collapse. Shelves stripped bare in 48 hours, prices tripling overnight. Your neighbor refreshing a delivery app that shows nothing available within 50 miles, and you walk to your backyard, reach up, and pull a ripe pear off a branch that finally learned to produce 3 seasons ago because of a nail. $0 spent at the garden center ever again. Now scale that understanding. 1 nail on 1 trunk becomes 10 trees corrected across a single backyard. 10 trees become a canopy that feeds a stock household through winter with preserved fruit, dried fruit, fermented fruit. No dependency, no middleman standing between your family and calories. The industry that sells flowering enhancers does not lose sleep over one gardener going rogue. They lose sleep over 1,000 gardeners realizing the same truth in the same month, that the answers were never hidden because they were dangerous. They were hidden because they were free. Every bottle of synthetic gibberellin sold depends on you believing your tree is deficient. It is not deficient, it is waiting, and now you know exactly what it is waiting for. This is not a hobby. Hobbies do not feed children when freight lines shut down. Hobbies do not eliminate a recurring expense from your monthly budget permanently. What you hold now is a piece of knowledge that converts a decorative tree into a food-producing asset, using 30 seconds of labor and a tool already sitting in your garage. That is sovereignty, quiet, unglamorous, completely real. Sovereignty over whether your household eats what it grows or begs for what a corporation decides to ship. Share this with the person you know who stares at a barren tree every spring and blames themselves. They were never the problem. The system that sold them complexity was the problem. The answer was always simpler than anyone profiting from confusion would ever admit.